This is HOA Meltdown Moments. It started with snow and ended with a board meltdown. Karen screamed that my snow pile blocked a shared walkway corner and she was calling the plow contractor to move it and invoice me. You will widen this path right now, or you get fined again. She stood in the middle of the cleared sidewalk with a snow pusher propped against the curb like a barrier, phone in one gloved hand, breath fogging in the streetlight glare. I had just finished shoveling my driveway and the public walk in front of my unit at Three Oaks Village Association in St. Petersburg, Florida, and my pile sat 2 feet inside my property line where the slope met the grass. The pile was not blocking anything, but Courtney Collins did not care about facts. I work as a landscape irrigation tech, which means I get blamed for everything green or wet in this neighborhood. And now, apparently, everything white. This is the coldest winter St. Petersburg has seen in years, and the association decided to go full tilt on snow compliance. Courtney is the board secretary, which means she controls the paperwork, the vendor invoices, and the violation notices. She carries a ruler and a stopwatch everywhere, like she is measuring the universe for defects. You think this is petty? I think this is my purpose. She said that the first time 3 months ago, when she fined me for a trash can lid, she claimed was the wrong color, even though the lid was under 2 inches of snow and she could not possibly have seen it. I paid the $75 fine because I needed to keep my home insurance stable and could not afford a lien threat on my record. Tonight, she wanted me to reshovel a path I had already cleared twice, widen it by another foot into my own yard, and move my snow pile to somewhere unspecified. The problem was, my driveway had to stay accessible for an early shift tomorrow, and a plow berm kept getting pushed back into my cleared space like someone was testing me. I suspected the HOA plow crew was doing it on purpose, but I had no proof yet. I need my car free by 5 in the morning, Courtney. I already cleared this twice. She stepped closer, jabbing her finger at the pile. That pile encroaches on the shared corner radius and creates a sightline hazard. The covenant says snow must be placed on private property without obstructing ingress or emergency access. I shook my head. It is on my property. It is not blocking anything. She pulled out a roll of blank orange stickers from her coat pocket and slapped one onto the handle of my shovel. These are snow compliance tags. You have 2 hours to correct this or you get another fine, and if you ignore that, we authorize a tow. I stared at the orange sticker. You cannot tow my car for a snow pile. She smiled, the kind of smile that promised paperwork. You will pay the fee, then you will pay the fee about the fee. That line hit me like a slap, and I knew it was going to come back later. I pulled my phone out and took a photo of the pile, the cleared path, and Courtney holding the sticker roll. She did not flinch. Go ahead. Document your non-compliance. A couple stood on a porch 2 units down, watching like it was a show. The woman leaned on the railing with a mug in both hands, and the man had his arms crossed. They did not say anything, but I could feel their eyes tracking every word. I needed witnesses, but I also needed them to speak up when it mattered, and so far nobody in this neighborhood wanted to make waves with Courtney. She turned and walked back toward the clubhouse, snow pusher slung over one shoulder like a prop in a low-budget action movie. I stood there in the cold, shovel in one hand, phone in the other, trying to figure out what rule I had actually broken and how I was going to prove she was wrong. I went inside and pulled up the HOA covenant on my laptop. The snow section was 2 paragraphs long and vague as hell. Residents must clear walkways within 24 hours of snowfall and place removed snow on private property without obstruction to shared infrastructure. Nothing about corner radius. Nothing about sightlines. Nothing about orange compliance tags. I took screenshots and started a new folder on my desktop labeled Winter Evidence. Then, I went back outside with a tape measure and photographed the distance from my pile to the sidewalk edge, the curb, and the nearest shared walkway intersection. 2 feet, 3 feet, and 8 feet. Clear margins. I also took wide shots showing other units with snow piles closer to the street, some literally touching the curb, 0 tags on those. The next morning I woke up at 4 to find a plow berm shoved back across my driveway exit, a solid 2-foot ridge of hard-packed snow and ice that would take 20 minutes to clear. My shift started at 6. I grabbed the shovel and started hacking at the berm under my porch light, breath steaming, fingers numb even through gloves. Halfway through, Courtney walked past with a coffee thermos and a clipboard, headed toward the clubhouse. She slowed down just long enough to say, "That is what happens when you ignore compliance." Then she kept walking. I wanted to throw the shovel, but I kept digging instead. I made it to work 10 minutes late, which earned me a side-eye from my supervisor, but no write-up. I spent the day running service calls on busted backflow preventers and frozen irrigation lines, my mind half on the job and half on Courtney's face when she slapped that sticker on my shovel. By the time I got home, there was a paper notice tucked into my storm door. Violation reference snow compliance tag SC47. Fine assessed, $75. Payment due within 10 business days. Failure to comply may result in lien initiation and vendor action up to and including towing authorization. I read it 3 times. Vendor action. That was new. I took a photo of the notice and added it to my evidence folder, then sent a text to my neighbor 2 units over, a guy named Marcus who worked night shift at a hospital and hated the HOA as much as I did. Got another bogus fine. They are threatening towing now. He replied within a minute. Same. They hit me last week for ice on my steps, even though I salted twice. This is getting out of control. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about the phrase towing authorization and wondering if the HOA actually had a contract that let them do that, or if Courtney was bluffing with paperwork she controlled. I started searching the county property records and the association bylaws for anything about towing vendors. Nothing. I found the management company contact info and made a note to call them in the morning, but I had a feeling they would just defer to the board. At 2 in the morning, I was still awake, scrolling through the neighborhood group chat, and that was when I saw it. Courtney had posted a message at 11 p.m. with a photo of my driveway and snow pile captioned, "Resident continues to create hazard conditions during active winter storm response. Association is escalating compliance per emergency protocol." No names, but the photo clearly showed my unit number on the mailbox post. Someone replied, "That pile is not even blocking anything," and Courtney responded, "Safety compliance is not negotiable." Another resident chimed in, "Why are you posting photos of people's homes in a public chat?" And Courtney ignored that one. I took screenshots of the whole thread and saved them. She was painting me as a hazard in writing, in a semi-public forum with no evidence and no due process. That was escalation step 1, and I knew step 2 was coming. The next day, I called the management company and got transferred twice before landing with a compliance coordinator named Linda, who sounded tired. I explained the situation, the bogus fine, the group chat post, the towing threat. She sighed. The board has discretion on enforcement during emergency conditions. If you believe the fine is incorrect, you can request a hearing. I asked if the association had an actual tow contract on file. She paused. I would have to check with the board secretary. That is Courtney Collins. I felt my stomach drop. So Courtney controls the paperwork for the thing she is threatening me with. Linda did not answer that directly. You can file a formal dispute and request documentation. I will email you the form. I filed the dispute that afternoon and requested copies of the tow vendor contract, the emergency snow protocol, and any site inspection notes related to my violation. I also sent a certified letter to the HOA registered agent asking the same questions. Then I waited. A week went by with no response. My early shifts kept getting harder because the plow berm kept reappearing every morning like clockwork, always shoved back into my driveway exit, always just thick enough to cost me 15 minutes I did not have. I started setting my alarm earlier and earlier. Marcus texted me that he got another fine for the same ice on steps issue even though he had photos proving he salted. "They are just making stuff up now," he wrote. "We need to do something." I agreed, but I did not know what something looked like yet. Then Courtney escalated to step 2. I got a letter on HOA letterhead, signed by her, stating that due to continued non-compliance and safety hazard creation, I was banned from using the community clubhouse, fitness room, and pool area until further notice. The letter cited no specific rule, no hearing, no vote. Just a unilateral ban as punishment for questioning her. I read it twice and felt my hands start shaking. This was not about snow anymore. This was about control. I scanned the letter and added it to my evidence folder. Then I called Marcus and told him to meet me at the clubhouse. We walked into the clubhouse together at 7 p.m., both in workout gear, ready to test the ban. The front desk attendant, a college kid named Josh who worked part-time, looked confused when I swiped my key fob and it beeped green. "You are supposed to be restricted," he said. Courtney sent an email. I pulled out my phone and showed him the ban letter. "This has no effective date, no process, no rule citation. It is not enforceable." Josh looked between me and Marcus, clearly not wanting to get in the middle. "I am just going to let you in, and if Courtney asks, I will say the system did not flag you." We went in and used the fitness room for an hour, both of us waiting for Courtney to show up and make a scene. She did not. But the next morning, my car was gone. I walked out at 5 a.m. to a completely empty driveway, fresh plow berm shoved into the space where my car had been, and a single orange sticker stuck to my mailbox post. I stood there in the freezing wind, staring at the empty spot, my brain trying to catch up. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line. They transferred me to a tow yard dispatcher who confirmed my car had been picked up at 3:30 a.m. under HOA authorization and was currently at Northside Impound. I asked for the authorization paperwork. The dispatcher said I would have to get that from the HOA or come to the yard in person. I called in rideshare and headed to the impound yard, my mind racing. The tow had happened in the middle of the night with no warning, no final notice, no phone call. Just gone. The rideshare dropped me at a chain link lot surrounded by snowbanks, and I walked into a prefab office that smelled like burnt coffee and diesel. The clerk behind the counter was a middle-aged woman with reading glasses on a chain. "I need my car." She looked up my plate number and pulled a file. "That will be $375. Storage starts tomorrow at $50 per day." I asked to see the authorization paperwork. She slid a single sheet across the counter. It was an HOA letterhead form with Courtney's signature, dated 2 days ago, claiming my vehicle was parked in violation of emergency snow protocol and authorized for immediate removal. I took a photo of the form with my phone. This says 2 days ago, but my car was not towed until this morning. She shrugged. "We just go by what the contract says." I stared at the paper. What contract? She pulled a binder from under the counter and flipped to a tab. "This is the service agreement between Three Oaks Village Association and Northside Towing, effective October 1st. I read the first page. It was a standard tow vendor contract, but the signature line for the HOA was blank. I pointed at it. "This is not signed." The clerk leaned in and squinted. "Huh. That is weird. Let me check with my manager." She disappeared into a back office, and I stood there holding my phone, heart pounding, realizing I might have just found the crack in Courtney's armor. The clerk came back with a guy in a stained Carhartt jacket who introduced himself as the yard manager. "We have been working with Three Oaks for 3 months," he said. "The contract is still being finalized, but we have a verbal agreement with the board." I shook my head. You cannot tow someone's car based on a verbal agreement and unsigned paperwork. He crossed his arms. "Take it up with the HOA. I am not releasing the vehicle without payment." I paid the $375 on my credit card, hands shaking, and got a receipt. Then I asked for a printed copy of the unsigned contract and the authorization form. The manager hesitated, then printed both and handed them over. I walked out into the freezing lot, got into my car, and sat there for 5 minutes, just breathing. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, hit like and subscribe, because it gets even more absurd. I drove straight to the county administrative building and asked to speak to someone in code enforcement. They directed me to a supervisor named Karen, which was darkly funny, but she turned out to be reasonable. I showed her the unsigned tow contract, the backdated authorization, and the ban letter. She took notes and said, "This looks like improper enforcement without due process. You should file a formal complaint with the management company and request a board hearing. If they retaliate, come back and we will open an investigation." I thanked her and left, but I knew a complaint was not going to be enough. I needed something bigger. That afternoon, I went through my evidence folder and started building a timeline. Courtney had been escalating enforcement for 3 months, always targeting the same handful of residents, always using vague rule interpretations, always threatening fees and liens without clear process. I had screenshots of the group chat post, photos of selective snowpile enforcement, the bogus trash can lid fine, the unsigned tow contract, and the backdated authorization form. But I was still missing the smoking gun, the one thing that would prove she was acting in bad faith and abusing her role. Then I remembered something. The gate access log. Three Oaks has a vehicle gate at the main entrance with a card reader that logs every entry and exit. I had noticed over the past 2 weeks that my gate card had been rejected twice, forcing me to use the pedestrian gate and walk around in the cold to get to my unit. I had assumed it was a glitch. But what if it was not? I pulled up the resident portal and requested my access log for the past 90 days. It took 6 hours for the file to arrive, and when I opened it, I saw the gaps. My card had been manually disabled 3 times in the past month, each time for 12 to 24 hours, always during my work shifts. The log showed admin override, user C. Collins. Courtney had been deliberately blocking my access to make my life harder, and she had left a digital trail. I printed the log and added it to my folder. This was my trump card. Courtney had overreached, and I had proof. I let her think I was cornered, because my trump card needed her to overreach, but I was not ready to play it yet. I needed her to push harder, to make one more move that would force the board and the management company to act. I did not have to wait long. 2 days later, Marcus texted me at midnight. "They are trying to tow me right now." I threw on my jacket and ran outside. A flatbed tow truck was idling in the guest parking lot, yellow lights flashing, and Courtney was standing next to the driver with a flashlight in one hand and her clipboard in the other. Marcus was blocking the truck with his body, both hands up. "This is insane," he shouted. "My car is legally parked. I have a guest pass." Courtney aimed the flashlight at his face. "The pass expired at 11. You are in violation." The tow driver, a younger guy with a reflective vest, looked uncomfortable. "I need to see the actual authorization paperwork," he said. Courtney shoved the clipboard at him. "It is right here." I walked up with my phone already recording. The driver glanced at the clipboard, then at Marcus, then at me with the camera. I am not hooking this up without a signed contract and a clear violation. Courtney spun toward me, flashlight beam cutting through the flurries. "You are not authorized to be here." "This is board business." I kept my phone steady. "This is a public area and I am a resident." You are attempting an unauthorized tow based on paperwork you control with no oversight. The driver stepped back and pulled out his own phone. I am calling my dispatch. If this is not legit, I am not taking the liability. Courtney's face went red. You are interfering with official association enforcement. I will have you fined for obstruction. I pulled the printed gate access log from my jacket pocket and held it up. You have been blocking my gate access for weeks using admin override. I have the log. You have been selectively enforcing snow rules while ignoring worse violations on other units. I have photo evidence. And you just tried to tow 2 residents using an unsigned vendor contract and backdated authorization forms. I have copies. The driver heard that and lowered his phone. The contract is not signed? Courtney opened her mouth, closed it, then turned to the driver. That is a clerical issue. The agreement is valid. The driver shook his head. I am out. Call me when you have real paperwork. He climbed into the truck and drove off, leaving Courtney standing in the snow with her flashlight and clipboard. Breath fogging, face locked in fury. She pointed at me. You just cost the association vendor response time during an emergency. I will be filing a formal complaint. I stepped closer, phone still recording. File whatever you want. I am filing a complaint with the management company and the county for harassment, selective enforcement, and abuse of admin access. She did not say anything. She just turned and walked toward the clubhouse, snow pusher left behind propped against a light post. Marcus exhaled hard. That was unreal. I nodded. It is not over yet. The next morning, I compiled everything into a single email. The unsigned tow contract, the backdated authorization forms, the selective enforcement photos, the group chat screenshots, the ban letter with no process, and the gate access log showing deliberate obstruction. I sent it to the management company compliance coordinator, the HOA registered agent, the board president, and I CC'd the county code enforcement supervisor. Subject line: formal complaint for board secretary abuse of authority and harassment. Then I waited. The response came faster than I expected. The board president, a retired accountant named Gerald, called me that afternoon. I understand there have been some issues with enforcement procedures. We are going to schedule an emergency board meeting to review the snow compliance program and discuss resident concerns. I will make sure you and Marcus are allowed to speak. I asked if Courtney would be there. Gerald paused. She is the secretary, so yes. But this is a formal review, and we will have the management company present to ensure proper process. The meeting was set for 3 days later at the clubhouse. I spent those 3 days organizing my evidence into a printed packet with tabs: tow contract issues, selective enforcement, gate access abuse, group chat harassment, ban without process. I made copies for every board member and the management company rep. Marcus did the same with his ice step fines and photos. The night before the meeting, Courtney posted in the neighborhood group chat again. Tomorrow's board meeting will address resident complaints and clarify emergency snow protocol compliance expectations. All residents are welcome to attend. She was spinning it like she was the reasonable one. I screenshot the post and added it to my packet under a new tab: Reputation Management. The meeting started at 7 p.m. in the clubhouse community room. About 20 residents showed up, most of them sitting in the back with arms crossed. The board sat at a folding table up front. Gerald the president, Courtney the secretary with her clipboard and a stack of orange stickers, a treasurer named Pam who looked like she wanted to be anywhere else, and 2 at-large members who barely spoke. The management company compliance coordinator, Linda, sat off to the side with a laptop. Gerald opened with a speech about community standards and cooperation, then invited resident comments. Marcus went first. He laid out his timeline of bogus fines, showed his salt purchase receipts and photos, and pointed out that 3 other units had worse ice conditions with 0 enforcement. Courtney interrupted. Those units were inspected and found compliant. Marcus shook his head. No, they were not. I checked with those neighbors. Nobody inspected anything. Then it was my turn. I walked up with my packet and started handing out copies. I kept my voice calm and factual. I have been targeted for 3 months with selective enforcement, bogus fines, and harassment. I have photo evidence showing other units with worse violations and 0 consequences. I have a gate access log proving the board secretary deliberately blocked my access using admin override. I have an unsigned tow vendor contract and backdated authorization forms showing improper towing procedures. And I have documentation of a public group chat post that painted me as a safety hazard with no evidence and no due process. I stopped and looked at Courtney. You told me I would pay the fee, then pay the fee about the fee. That is not compliance. That is extortion. The room went silent. Gerald flipped through the packet, face getting tighter with every page. Linda leaned forward and said, "If this access log is accurate, that is a serious violation of resident rights." Courtney stood up, hands flat on the table. "I was enforcing emergency protocol as authorized by the board." Gerald cut her off. "I never authorized access blocking. We never voted on that." Pam, the treasurer, spoke up for the first time. "I never saw an invoice for this tow vendor. How are we paying them?" Courtney sat back down, face pale. That was being finalized. One of the at-large members, a quiet guy named Tom, raised his hand. "I want to see the compliance inspection records for the snow violations. If we are fining residents, we need documentation." Courtney did not answer. Linda said, "I can request those from the management files." Tom nodded. "Please do. And I want to see the signed vendor contracts for any service we are authorizing. If they are not signed, we are not paying." A resident in the back stood up, a woman named Claire who had lived here for 15 years. "I have been watching this all winter. Courtney has been targeting the same 5 or 6 people while ignoring worse problems on her street. This is not about safety. This is personal." Another resident agreed. "I got fined for snow on my steps the same day 3 other units had worse conditions and nothing happened. Why?" Courtney stood again, voice rising. "You are all ignoring the fact that we have emergency protocols in place to protect property values and liability exposure. I am doing my job." Gerald shook his head. "Your job is to follow the process we vote on. If you have been improvising enforcement without board approval, that is a problem." Linda closed her laptop and said, "Based on what I am seeing here, I recommend an immediate audit of all winter violation notices, a suspension of any vendor actions pending contract review, and a formal written correction to affected residents. I also recommend the board consider whether continued selective enforcement constitutes harassment under association bylaws." That last part landed like a bomb. Courtney looked at Linda, then at Gerald, then at the room full of residents staring at her. She grabbed her clipboard and walked out without saying another word. Snow Pusher left leaning against her empty chair. The meeting continued for another hour. Gerald apologized on behalf of the board and promised a full review. Marcus and I stayed until the end, and several other residents came up to thank us for speaking up. One of them, a neighbor named Jen, said, "I have been wanting to say something for months, but I was afraid of retaliation. You just proved it was worth the risk." I handed her a copy of my evidence packet. "Use this if you need it." 2 weeks later, the management company issued a formal letter to every homeowner in Three Oaks Village Association. It stated that a compliance audit had revealed improper enforcement procedures, unsigned vendor contracts, and selective application of rules during the winter emergency period. All snow-related fines issued between December and February were being retracted, and affected residents would receive refunds within 30 days. The letter also stated that the board had voted to terminate the relationship with the tow vendor pending proper contract execution and oversight. Courtney Collins received a written warning for harassment behavior and abuse of administrative access, and her admin privileges were revoked. If further issues arose, she would be removed from the board. I got my $75 fine refunded, plus the $375 I paid to get my car out of impound. Marcus got his money back too. The plow berm problem stopped immediately after the meeting, and my gate access was restored with no more mysterious outages. Courtney stayed on the board as secretary, but stopped showing up at meetings. The new compliance chair, Tom, sent an email introducing himself and promising transparent enforcement with documented inspections and clear timelines. The neighborhood group chat went quiet on enforcement drama, and people started posting normal stuff again, like lost pets and garage sale notices. But the best moment came 3 weeks after the meeting. I was shoveling my driveway after a light dusting, and Courtney walked past on her way to the mailboxes. She did not look at me. She did not say anything. She just kept walking. No clipboard, no snow pusher, no orange stickers. A neighbor who had watched the original confrontation called out from her porch, "Looks like you got your path cleared just fine." I waved at her. Turns out it was never about the path. Marcus and I kept the evidence folder updated just in case, but we never needed it again. Courtney stopped enforcing anything, and the board actually started following process. They hired a new management company in the spring and rewrote the covenant enforcement section to require documented inspections, clear timelines, and board votes on any major actions. The tow vendor situation never came back because the new compliance chair refused to authorize anything without signed contracts and proper oversight. I ran into the tow yard clerk again a few months later when I was picking up a parts order near the impound lot. She recognized me and said, "You know, after you left that day, we looked into a bunch of other Three Oaks tows and found the same problem with the unsigned contract. We ended up refunding 4 other residents and dropping the account. Your complaint basically shut down a whole mess." I thanked her and realized she had been my quiet ally the whole time, the one who showed me the unsigned contract and gave me the printed evidence. Sometimes the person behind the counter sees the scam before anyone else. The funny karma beat came during a neighborhood petition that forced a vote at the next annual meeting. Someone started a petition to require quarterly compliance audits and transparent vendor contracts, and it got signed by 60% of the homeowners in 2 weeks. The petition language quoted Courtney's own phrase from the group chat post, "Safety compliance is not negotiable, so we demand compliance from the board." Courtney had to sit through the vote as secretary and record the results, unanimous approval. The rule she used to justify harassment now required her own work to be audited every quarter. She resigned from the board 3 months later and moved out by the end of the year. Three Oaks is not perfect, but it is better. People actually read the rules now. The board posts meeting agendas and minutes online. Nobody gets towed without a signed contract and a documented violation. And when it snows, people shovel their walks and pile their snow wherever makes sense. No orange stickers, no midnight tow trucks, no clipboards with rulers. I still see the couple who watched the original confrontation from their porch, and every time we make eye contact, they smile and give me a thumbs up like I won a championship. I did not win anything. I just refused to let someone abuse the system unchallenged, and it turned out I was not the only one who felt that way. I still work as a landscape irrigation tech. I still set my alarm early to beat the weather. I still shovel my driveway and clear my walks. But now when I finish and look at the neat snow pile on my property line, 2 feet back from the sidewalk, I do not worry about someone screaming at me or threatening my car. The pile sits there until it melts, which is exactly how it should be. No drama, no compliance tags. No board secretary with a vendetta and a roll of stickers. Just a pile of snow that will be gone by next week, leaving behind nothing but a memory of the winter Courtney tried to tow my car and lost. Looking back, the whole thing escalated because Courtney believed the rules were whatever she decided they were, and nobody had ever forced her to prove it. The tow contract was never signed. The emergency protocol was never voted on. The compliance tags were something she invented. And the access blocking was just petty revenge for questioning her. She built a system that worked as long as nobody looked too closely, and the second someone did, it collapsed. The trump card was not just the gate access log. It was the fact that every piece of her enforcement chain had a hole in it, and once I started pulling the thread, the whole thing unraveled. The management company audit found that Courtney had been backdating notices for months to manufacture late fees and justify escalations. She would issue a violation, wait a week, then backdate a warning notice to make it look like the homeowner had ignored repeated contacts. That was the twist that came out during the review, and it explained why so many residents felt ambushed by fines they never saw coming. The audit forced the board to retract dozens of violations and refund thousands of dollars in bogus fees. Courtney tried to spin it as clerical errors and coordination issues, but nobody bought it. The pattern was too consistent, and the evidence was too clear. The county code enforcement supervisor I spoke to early on ended up opening a broader investigation into HOA vendor relationships across the region, and Three Oaks became a case study in what happens when a board member controls too much paperwork without oversight. The investigation did not result in charges, but it did result in new county guidelines for HOA vendor contracts and resident notification requirements. Courtney's overreach ended up changing policy beyond just our neighborhood, which felt like a bigger win than just getting my fine back. The showdown location I remember most clearly was not the board meeting or the midnight tow attempt. It was the clubhouse parking lot 2 days after the meeting, when Courtney came back to pick up her personal items from the secretary office. I happened to be walking past with Marcus, and she saw us and stopped. She stood there next to her car with a cardboard box of files and binders, wind cutting through the lot, flurries starting to fall again. She did not say anything at first. Then she said, "You think this is petty, I think this is my purpose." Same line, same tone, but it sounded hollow now. I did not respond. I just kept walking. Marcus said later she really believed she was protecting the neighborhood. That is the scary part. The final piece fell into place when the new compliance chair, Tom, found a folder in Courtney's old office files labeled Winter Enforcement Revenue Projections. It was a spreadsheet showing estimated fine income based on snowfall forecasts and average violation rates. She had been budgeting the association finances around expected fine revenue, which explained why enforcement ramped up so hard during heavy snow weeks. The fines were not about safety or compliance. They were about cash flow. Tom shared the spreadsheet at the next board meeting, and the room erupted. That was when the board voted to implement the quarterly audit requirement and ban any budgeting that relied on violation income. The vote was unanimous. Three Oaks has had 3 winters since then, and none of them have been anything like that first one. The snow rules are still in place, but they are enforced with actual inspections, photos, and warnings before fines. The new compliance chair sends a reminder email before every storm with clear guidelines and contact info for people who need help. The plow contractor was replaced with a crew that actually coordinates with residents instead of shoving berms into cleared driveways. And the tow vendor situation never came back because the board now requires signed contracts, insurance verification, and resident notification before any vehicle action. The system works when it is designed to be fair instead of punitive. I kept the evidence folder on my laptop, and I still add to it occasionally when something feels off. But mostly, it just sits there as a reminder that documentation matters, and standing up to abuse is worth it, even when it feels risky. Marcus and I became friends through the whole mess, and we still joke about the night Courtney tried to tow his car and the driver walked away. That moment changed everything, because it proved her authority was hollow. She could yell and threaten and wave paperwork, but when someone finally asked to see the actual contract, it all fell apart. The couple on the porch who watched the first confrontation invited Marcus and me over for dinner last spring, and we spent 2 hours talking about HOA horror stories and how to fix broken systems. They had been dealing with their own issues with Courtney over landscaping rules, but they never spoke up because they thought they were alone. After watching me push back, they filed their own complaint, and it added to the weight that eventually forced the audit. Small actions compound. One person challenging the system creates space for others to do the same. The insurance stability issue I was worried about at the start never materialized because I never let the fines turn into liens, and the audit cleared my record completely. My premiums stayed flat, and I refinanced my mortgage last year with no complications. The home value in Three Oaks actually went up after the management company change and the enforcement reform, which suggests that fair rules and transparent governance are better for property values than aggressive fine collection. Courtney used to argue that strict enforcement protected our investments, but the data proved the opposite. People want to live in a community that treats them fairly, not one that nickel and dimes them with bogus violations. I still see the orange compliance stickers sometimes, bundles of them left over in the clubhouse supply closet. Tom joked about burning them in a bonfire, but instead, he repurposed them as inventory tags for the community tool library. Now when I see an orange sticker, it is marking a snow shovel or a salt spreader that residents can borrow for free during storms. Same stickers, completely different meaning. That feels like the right kind of closure. Looking back, the scariest part was not the towing or the fines or even the access blocking. It was the isolation. Courtney made every targeted resident feel like they were the only one with a problem, like they were the difficult outlier who just needed to follow the rules. But once people started comparing notes, it became obvious the system was broken and we were all dealing with the same abuse. The neighborhood group chat, the same tool she used to shame me, became the place where people organized and shared evidence. She weaponized it, and we turned it into accountability. The city counter-confrontation Tom mentioned in his email summary was the moment I handed over the printed gate access log and the unsigned tow contract to the county code enforcement supervisor, and she opened the investigation file right there at the counter. I asked for an incident number, and she gave me one, along with a case reference and a direct phone line. That incident number became part of the formal complaint record and gave the management company legal cover to act decisively. It turned my evidence from angry resident complaint into official government documentation, and that shift in framing made all the difference. The HOA consequences were exactly what they needed to be. The vendor relationship tied to the abuse got canceled, the enforcement procedures got rewritten, and the board had to mail a written correction to every homeowner explaining what went wrong and what changed. Courtney got her written warning for harassment behavior, and her admin access was stripped. She could have stayed on the board and rebuilt trust, but she chose to leave instead, probably because she knew the quarterly audits would expose her completely if she kept operating the same way. The system corrected itself once the transparency rules were in place. The Karen consequence, the written warning, was not as dramatic as some people wanted. A few residents pushed for her to be removed immediately, but the bylaws required due process, and the management company insisted on following proper steps. The warning was formal, it went in her file, and it set up the structure for removal if she escalated again. She never did, because the warning made it clear the board and management company were done protecting her. That was enough. Sometimes the punishment is just losing the protection you used to have. The payback vector, the neighbor petition that forced a vote during the annual meeting, was the cleanest and most satisfying part. It was not about revenge or personal grudges. It was about residents using the tools the bylaws gave them to demand accountability. The petition required 30% of homeowners to trigger a vote, and it got 60%. That level of support meant the board could not ignore it or delay it. They had to put the audit requirement and vendor contract transparency rules to a vote, and it passed unanimously because nobody wanted to defend the old system once the evidence was public. The funny karma beat, the neighbor fact-checking Courtney instantly during the meeting, was the moment Marcus showed his photos, proving no inspector had visited the other units Courtney claimed were compliant. She said they were inspected, and he immediately pulled out time-stamped photos showing the same ice conditions with zero evidence of inspection. She tried to argue, and another resident chimed in, "Nobody inspected my unit either, and I have worse conditions than his. You are just making this up." The room turned on her in real time, and she had no answer because there was no answer. She got caught in a lie with 20 witnesses, and it destroyed her credibility permanently. I never used my narrator accessory, the tow release receipt in a sleeve, as a weapon. I kept it as a reminder of how far Courtney was willing to go and how flimsy her justification was. The receipt showed the $375 impound fee, the unsigned authorization form, and the note from the yard manager about the verbal agreement issue. It was proof that the tow was improper from the start, and it supported every other piece of evidence I gathered. I showed it to the board, the management company, and the county supervisor, and every time it reinforced that Courtney was operating outside the rules. The secondary prop, the phone on speaker held low with the screen turned away, was something Courtney did during the first confrontation when she threatened to call the plow contractor. She held it like a weapon, like the act of holding the phone proved she had power. But she never actually made the call, because the plow contractor would have told her the same thing the tow driver did: "Show me the signed contract and the clear violation, or I am not doing it." The phone was a bluff, and I called it by taking photos and asking for documentation. Once you demand proof, bluffs collapse. The lens flavor, the wide-angle, low-angle, dramatic perspective, made every confrontation feel bigger and more intense than it probably was in real life. But that was how it felt in the moment. Standing in the snow at 5 a.m, staring at an empty driveway, or standing in the clubhouse parking lot at midnight watching a tow truck idle with lights flashing, everything felt heightened and cinematic. The cold amplified it. The wind amplified it. The darkness and the lights and the breath fog and the tension all combined into something visceral and overwhelming. I remember every detail because my brain recorded it like a crisis. The witness type, the couple on the porch watching like it was a show, became recurring characters in the story. They were there for the first confrontation, and they were there for the aftermath. They did not intervene, but they saw everything, and later they confirmed my version of events when the board asked for witness statements. Passive witnesses matter. They do not change the moment, but they validate the record, and in an HOA dispute, the record is everything. The weather flavor, the wind-driven flurries that sting your face, made every outdoor confrontation physically painful. You could not ignore the cold. You could not pretend it was not happening. The wind cut through every layer, and the flurries blurred your vision, and you had to keep wiping your face to see clearly. It added urgency to every decision. You could not stand outside arguing for an hour because you would freeze. You had to act fast, make your point, and get inside. That time pressure forced clarity and prevented endless circular arguments. The conflict object, the printed storm photo packet with no readable text in the foreground and faces still unobstructed, was part of the evidence I handed out at the board meeting. It showed side-by-side comparisons of snow conditions across multiple units, proving selective enforcement. The photos were clear, the conditions were documented, and the violations were obvious. Courtney tried to argue that the photos were taken at different times or that conditions changed between inspections, but the timestamps and weather data refuted that. The packet became the visual proof that made the audit inevitable. The neighborhood type, a community where the compliance chair carries a ruler and a stopwatch, was not an exaggeration. Courtney literally carried both. She measured sidewalk widths, setback distances, and snow pile dimensions with a folding ruler, and she timed how long it took residents to respond to notices using a stopwatch app on her phone. She documented everything with obsessive detail, which would have been impressive if she had applied it fairly. Instead, she used precision as a weapon, finding violations where none existed and ignoring actual problems when they suited her. The ruler and stopwatch became symbols of her control, and when she lost her admin access, she stopped carrying them. The tools only mattered when they gave her power. The HOA name, Three Oaks Village Association, sounded upscale and peaceful, which made the enforcement drama feel even more absurd. This was supposed to be a quiet suburban community with good schools and safe streets, not a war zone over snow piles and tow trucks. The name stayed the same, but the culture changed completely after the audit. Same signs, same rules, different enforcement. The brand recovered because the board admitted the problem and fixed it publicly. The location, St. Petersburg, Florida, felt wrong for a snow story until you remembered that even Florida gets winter storms, and when it does, nobody knows how to handle it. The infrastructure is not built for it. The residents are not used to it. And the HOA rules were written by people who thought snow compliance would never be a real issue, so the language was vague and easy to abuse. Courtney exploited that gap, and the audit closed it. Now the rules are specific, the process is clear, and the enforcement is documented. It took a crisis to force the fix, but the fix worked. My job, landscape irrigation tech, made me a target because I was the guy people called when their sprinklers froze or their backflow preventers burst. I was already associated with property maintenance problems, so when Courtney needed a scapegoat for snow issues, I was an easy pick. She assumed I would not fight back because I needed to maintain good relationships with HOA clients, but she miscalculated. Fighting back was not about burning bridges. It was about proving the bridge was on fire already, and the only way forward was to rebuild it properly. My appearance, the red close-cropped hair, tan winter jacket with the hood up, and the green knit cap I sometimes wore before switching to just the hood, made me recognizable in every photo and confrontation. Consistency mattered. I looked the same in the driveway argument, the midnight tow attempt, and the board meeting. That visual continuity helped people remember the timeline and connect the incidents. I was not just a random complainer. I was the same guy getting harassed repeatedly, and the repetition proved the pattern. Courtney's appearance, the gray hair in a sleek low ponytail, the blue puffer coat with the hood up, and the gray knit beanie she sometimes wore, made her equally recognizable. She looked professional and composed, which made her behavior more shocking. She did not look like a bully. She looked like a responsible board member trying to maintain order. That disconnect between appearance and action was part of what made people hesitate to challenge her. She had the look of authority, and people assumed authority meant legitimacy. It did not. Her catchphrase, "You think this is petty, I think this is my purpose," was chilling because she meant it. She genuinely believed aggressive enforcement was her civic duty, and she took pride in making people comply. That mindset is dangerous in any leadership position because it removes empathy and replaces it with righteousness. She was not enforcing rules to help the community. She was enforcing rules to prove she could. The power was the point. Her boomerang line, "You will pay the fee, then you will pay the fee about the fee," came back when the audit revealed the backdated notices and compounding late fees. She had weaponized the fee structure to maximize pain, and when the management company reversed the fees and issued refunds, she had to process the paperwork herself as secretary. She had to write the checks and mail the letters admitting the fees were improper. That was the boomerang. She built the trap, and she got caught in it. The trump card tease, I let her think I was cornered because my trump card needed her to overreach, was not bravado, it was strategy. I knew I had the gate access log, but if I played it too early, she would have adjusted her tactics and covered her tracks. I needed her to keep pushing, keep escalating, keep leaving evidence until the pattern was undeniable. The midnight tow attempt was the final overreach, and that was when I deployed the trump card by handing the officer on scene the gate access log and the unsigned tow contract and asking for an incident number immediately. The incident number locked in the timeline and made the evidence official. Once it was official, Courtney could not spin it or bury it. The trump card type, a gate access audit log showing my access was deliberately blocked, was perfect because it was digital, time-stamped, and tied directly to Courtney's admin account. She could not deny it or claim it was an accident when the log showed 3 separate manual overrides during my work shifts. It was targeted, it was intentional, and it was documented. That kind of evidence is bulletproof in an HOA dispute because it comes from the association's own system. She used the tools against me, and the tools recorded her abuse. The time pressure, my driveway has to be accessible for an early shift and a plow berm could trap my car, was real and constant. I could not afford to miss work because of HOA games. I could not afford to pay for ride shares every day because my car was blocked or towed. The financial stakes were not huge, but they were immediate and they compounded. Every berm, every delay, every fine added up, and the cumulative stress was the real damage. Courtney knew that, and she used it. But it also gave me urgency and focus. I could not afford to wait for the system to fix itself. I had to act. The escalation step 1, a neighborhood group chat post painting me as a hazard during a storm, was public shaming disguised as safety communication. Courtney posted my driveway photo with inflammatory language, hoping other residents would pile on and isolate me. It backfired because people saw through it and started questioning her instead. The post became evidence of harassment rather than proof of violation, and it shifted the narrative from me being the problem to her being the aggressor. The escalation step 2, an attempt to ban me from amenities entirely as punishment for questioning her, was the overreach that made the board take notice. You cannot unilaterally ban a resident from shared amenities without a hearing, a rule citation, and a vote. Courtney did it anyway, and when I tested the ban and the front desk let me in, it exposed the illegitimacy of the action. The board realized she was making up enforcement as she went, and that was the beginning of the end for her authority. The side complication, the HOA plow crew keeps pushing berms back into my cleared driveway like they are testing me, added a layer of frustration that made everything harder. I could not prove the plow crew was doing it deliberately, but the pattern was obvious. Every morning, same berm, same spot, always across my exit. It forced me to wake up earlier and earlier, and it kept me in a constant state of reactive stress. When the audit happened and the plow contractor got replaced, the berm problem stopped immediately, which suggested the crew was either taking direction from Courtney or operating without oversight. Either way, the new contractor fixed it. Courtney's role, board secretary who controls the paperwork, gave her disproportionate power because she managed the records, the notices, the vendor files, and the meeting minutes. She could shape the narrative by controlling what got documented and what got ignored. That power only works when nobody checks the paperwork, and once I started requesting copies and comparing records, the gaps became obvious. The unsigned contracts, the backdated notices, the selective enforcement, all of it was hidden in paperwork she controlled. Transparency killed her system. The trigger, A snow-covered trash can lid that Karen says is the wrong color and finds me anyway was absurd but real. She could not have seen the lid color under the snow, but she fined me anyway and dared me to appeal. I paid it because I thought fighting a $75 fine was not worth the risk. That was a mistake. Paying the first bogus fine taught her I would not push back, and it emboldened her to escalate. The lesson I learned was that letting small abuses slide invites bigger ones. The first fine should have been the line. The HOA method, tow authorization bluff, where they claim they can tow but refuse to show the contract, was a bluff because the contract did not exist in enforceable form. The tow vendor had a draft agreement and a verbal understanding, but no signed contract with proper insurance and indemnification. That gap meant every tow was legally questionable, and once the tow driver figured that out, he refused to proceed. Courtney relied on intimidation and assumed nobody would ask to see the actual paperwork. She was wrong. The stakes? I am trying to keep my home insurance stable, and the HOA is pushing me toward a claim, was about financial stability and long-term consequences. A lien on my property would have affected my credit, my insurance rates, and my ability to refinance. Courtney knew that, and she used the threat of a lien to pressure compliance. But the threat only works if the underlying violation is legitimate, and once I proved the violations were bogus, the lien threat evaporated. Insurance companies do not care about retracted fines. They care about active liens and unresolved claims. I kept my record clean by fighting back before the damage became permanent. The evidence type, a comparison photo set showing multiple sidewalks worse than mine with 0 fines, was simple but devastating. I walked the neighborhood with my phone and photographed every snow pile, every unshoveled walk, every ice patch within 3 blocks. Then I cross-referenced those addresses with the violation notices I got from the management company through my records request. The pattern was undeniable. I got fined for conditions that were better than average, while worse conditions on other streets got ignored. That was selective enforcement, and the photos proved it beyond argument. The evidence reveal, I escalate to a regional supervisor and force a written correction, was the moment I took the fight outside the HOA and involved the county. The management company and the board could ignore internal complaints, but they could not ignore a county code enforcement inquiry. The regional supervisor reviewed my evidence, agreed the enforcement was improper, and required a written correction as part of closing the investigation. That correction went to every homeowner, not just me, and it became part of the public record. The HOA had to admit fault in writing, and that admission gave every affected resident leverage for refunds and record corrections. The signature detail, a roll of blank orange stickers Karen calls snow compliance tags, was a physical symbol of her made-up authority. She bought the stickers herself, printed no official information on them, and used them to mark violations with no documentation or tracking. They were props, not enforcement tools. But they worked because people assumed the stickers meant something official. Once the audit revealed the stickers had no official status and no tracking system, they became evidence of improvised enforcement rather than proof of violations. The stickers were a scam, and the scam collapsed when people asked what they actually meant. The ally, a tow yard clerk who quietly admits the HOA paperwork is sloppy, was the inside voice that confirmed my suspicions. She did not blow a whistle or make a dramatic stand. She just printed the unsigned contract and handed it to me with a look that said, "You are going to want to see this." That small act of honesty gave me the leverage I needed to challenge the tow and force the vendor relationship review. Allies do not have to be loud. They just have to be willing to show you the truth when it matters. The twist, management has been backdating winter notices to manufacture late fees, came out during the audit and explained why so many residents felt ambushed by enforcement. Courtney would issue a violation, wait for the deadline to pass, then backdate a warning notice to make it look like the resident had been given advance notice and ignored it. That manufactured a late fee and justified escalation to fines and liens. The backdating was visible in the digital timestamps once the auditor compared the notice dates to the email send dates. The timestamps did not match, and that discrepancy unraveled the whole scheme. Courtney had been running a fee farming operation disguised as compliance enforcement, and the twist exposed it completely. The showdown location, the clubhouse parking lot with a tow truck idling in falling snow, was the peak of the conflict. Everything converged in that moment: the midnight tow attempt, the flashing lights, the driver refusing to hook without real authorization, Courtney shining a flashlight at my camera, and me pulling out the printed evidence and forcing the confrontation into the open. The parking lot was cold and exposed. No walls, no privacy, just a public space where the truth had to win because there was nowhere to hide. The driver walking away was the turning point. He was the neutral party who looked at the paperwork and said, "This is not legit," and that validation broke Courtney's grip on the situation. Set piece 1. The midnight tow attempt where Karen shines a bright flashlight at my camera and the driver refuses to hook without real authorization was chaos and clarity at the same time. The flashlight was an attempt to blind the camera and stop me from recording, but it just made her look desperate. The driver was caught between his dispatcher, the HOA, and 2 residents with phones recording everything. He made the smart choice and walked away. That moment proved Courtney's authority was hollow, and it gave Marcus and me the confidence to escalate to the management company and the county. Set piece 2. A city counter confrontation where I proved the rule was misquoted in writing. Was quieter but just as decisive. I stood at the county code enforcement counter with my evidence packet and walked the supervisor through every piece. She compared the HOA notices to the actual covenant language and found multiple misquotes and unsupported claims. Courtney had been paraphrasing the rules to make them sound stricter than they were, and the supervisor called it out in her notes. That documentation became part of the investigation file and forced the written correction. The counter was just a desk in a government building, but it was the place where official power shifted from Courtney to the oversight system. The outcome: the HOA must mail a written correction to every homeowner and retract the false winter violations while Karen tries to spin it and fails, was the resolution. The correction letter went out, the refunds went out, and the policy changes went into effect. Courtney tried to frame it as a procedural cleanup and lessons learned, but nobody bought it. The evidence was too clear, the pattern was too obvious, and the residents were too informed. She lost credibility, she lost authority, and she lost her position within a year. The system corrected itself because people demanded accountability, and the oversight structure worked when it was finally engaged. The end sign-off is simple. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.